Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So in today's episode, we're just talking about cards from Phantom Nightmare, which we have the sneak peek event for this upcoming weekend. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think the yugioh sneak peek mat looks absolutely amazing. I'm definitely going to be aiming for that one. There's a bunch of websites and such that have done pre-sales for Phantom Nightmare. I don't really like looking at pre-sale prices. You guys can go look that information up for yourselves, and a lot of the time, those prices are really high. What I'm more interested in, and what I think would bring more value to you guys, is to look at where the cards' prices are going to go. So today we're going to take a look at some of the main cards out of Phantom Nightmare, and try to look at cards from the last half dozen sets or so that would be comparable, both in terms of how they are viewed by the community, as well as how their prices will behave once the set officially drops. Let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, we're starting off with the most expensive card currently up for pre-sale from the set right now, outside of the quarter century cards of course, and that is Lo, Prayers of the Voiceless Voice. First, let me say that I hate the fact that they changed her name from Novox to Lo, since Novox's Prayer is literally a card already in the TCG. Anyways, Lo is, I think, the most hyped out of all the secret rares, since Popless and Promethean Princess are now confirmed to be ultras. The Voiceless Voice deck looks like it'll be a really solid strategy. Not the best deck, because we're probably looking at Snake Eye Fire King as like a tier 0.5 strategy, but Voiceless Voice I think will be one of the better decks in the next tier down. I think that pre-sales for Lo are quite high, right around $70 to $80 per copy. The tricky thing about Lo is that a lot of the other secret rares in the set aren't that great, and that alone is going to cause a few of the good secret rares to be higher than we would normally expect, as players and vendors and stores struggle to make back money on the cases that they've opened. For me, I'm expecting Lo to come in at around $40 to $50. Voiceless Voice has a lot of potential, and it's still going to be a really solid deck, especially after Snake Eye Fire King eventually gets hit, so I think it will still be a pretty worthwhile card. As a comparison, I'm thinking of Sprite Blue, but not when Sprites first dropped and took over everything. I'm thinking of how Sprites and Sprite Blue looked after Tier Limit got the Ishizu cards, to where they were still a good deck, just not as good as like a tier 0 strategy. The deck will still have a lot of supporters and people wanting to play it. Don't expect the deck to be cheap just because it's not the best deck of the format. The next card that we have is Snake Eyes Popless, which, to absolutely everyone's surprise, is actually an ultra rare rather than a secret. I know everyone thought it was going to be a secret rare and was bracing for this to be like a $120, $130 card, but ultras aren't actually as bad. They're still a chase card, but they won't be nearly as insane. The pre-sales for this card are right around $60, making it more than most of the secrets in the set, and when I was going through cards, I couldn't really think of something that was sort of similar to it. However, I think we have the perfect card to compare Popless to, and that is Kashtira Fenrir. Much like with Fenrir, Popless is a 2 to 3 of that most players looking at meta decks are going to end up playing. Sure, Popless isn't as generic as Fenrir, but the amount of play it sees should be pretty comparable, as Popless is needed in all Snake Eye decks, but Fenrir isn't necessarily needed in every single deck outside of Kashtira. Now, part of what drove Fenrir's price down eventually was that we were afraid of it constantly getting hit on the ban list as well, but that still hasn't happened to this day. With Popless though, given that we're still going to be receiving more Snake Eye support in the next couple of sets, I don't think we have to worry about it going anywhere. The one thing I'm not too sure about is whether or not people are going to run 2 or 3 copies of Popless in the Snake Eye deck. I believe a lot of players looking at OCG lists just use 2 copies, but I have seen some with 3, and I'm not sure how the TCG will adapt given how different the 2 formats are. If we do see the card run at 2, then maybe I could see this card being $30 to $40, but with all of the hype around the Snake Eye stuff and how crazy the price of Bonfire is, as well as how underwhelming the rest of the set is, I really am expecting Popless to be like a $50 card. It hasn't happened in quite a while, maybe back with Borreload's Savage Dragon or IP Masquerena, but even as an ultra rare, I wouldn't be surprised to see Popless as the most expensive non-quarter century card from the set. Moving on to the other hyped card from the set, and miraculously another card that was expected to be a secret and instead ended up just being an ultra, it's Promethean Princess, Bestower of Flames. Now, just like with Popless, Promethean Princess is actually the 3rd most expensive card in the set, and it's just one of the ultras, which is pretty crazy. It's another card that everyone expected to be secret, somehow ended up as an ultra, but the pre-sales for it are still pretty high, most around the $50 to $60 range. This is a card that should come down in price, but will come back down slowly. even though it's a Link 3 monster that just gets added to the extra deck, a lot of builds will typically run 2 copies of this card because it's just that strong. The other thing to note, I think, is that with Horus decks probably going to start running Buzz King, it's going to be even more important to run 2 copies of this in the future just in case one of them gets ripped. I think the only thing it makes sense to compare this card to is another extra deck monster that was an ultra rare yet hit a crazy price point, so I would think of the prices of either Borreload Savage Dragon or IP Masquerena. IP makes the most sense, and it should end up being pretty consistent in that $30 to $40 range. Savage Dragon did end up hitting a higher price point at one point, but I believe that's because it was short printed as an ultra in the set, and the card did some weird things. It started trending up again even though we had the reprint for it kind of confirmed. Just like with Popless, this is a card that's going to be a key piece of a close to tier 0 strategy, so the demand for it is going to be there, and with so few other worthwhile secret rares in the set, expect this card to maintain a relatively high price point even after the set drops. Alright, so after those 3 cards, we do see a pretty notable drop off in the quality of secret rares and such in the set. The next card we're looking at is the Black Goat Laughs, better known as Rumpelteufel for those of you that know the card from the OCG. This card is interesting. It's kind of like a trap card prohibition. It doesn't exactly stop use of the card, but it stops that monster's name from being special summoned, except from the graveyard, during the turn it's activated, and then you can also banish it from the graveyard to stop both players from using a certain monster's name effect on the field for the rest of the turn. Although this reads as a generic card, it's actually only really useful in the Labyrinth deck. They are able to set it from the deck with Lady Labyrinth, but more likely is that they're discarding it with Chandelier or Stovey Torby, and then banishing it from the graveyard there. We do have lots of secret rares in different sets that are only useful for one archetype, and that archetype can often be good or great. For instance, Visa Samsara is used by Manadium, and Manadium is a good deck, but it's only a $4 card. However, I think that looking at the Black Goat Laughs, we have to instead compare it to something like Dark Corridor, a key card for the Dark World strategy, which is pretty useful, but it's only good in the one deck. The reason we're comparing the two is that Duelist Nexus is another set that really wasn't all that great. In terms of value, it had Revolution Synchron, but that was really it, and the set was kind of underwhelming. So when I look at the Black Goat Laughs, I think that it's one of the cards that could potentially hit a higher price point because of the context of the set that it's in, whereas if it was a set that had better cards, it might be a lot cheaper. That said, I'm expecting it to settle between 15 and 20. Labyrinth is still one of the more hyped up decks right now, and it's still really strong. It's just not quite up there with Snake Eye Fire King, and maybe even Voiceless Voice. The pre-sales for this card are coming in at around $25 to $30, so expect this card to come down in price a bit more, but remain decent as people try to make Labyrinth work. On to the next one, we have one that I think is going to be one of my sleeper picks for this set. It's Metamorphosis. So personally, I think this card is really crazy, and it will always have potential as long as the runic engine is viable. I just think the card's kind of insane. You tribute a fusion or synchro monster, and then special summon a monster from your main deck with the same level. So literally like a backwards Metamorphosis that can also tribute a synchro. In Runic, this becomes a really useful card if you're playing it to turn Hugin into Sprite Blue, Jerry into Quem, or Sleipnir into a generator monster. However, there's a lot of cards that seem like they might be useful or have potential, but they just never manage to find their way into a deck because of space or consistency issues, and I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen with Metamorphosis. The pre-sales for this card are currently around $15 to $20, indicating that the market believes this is going to be one of the cheaper secrets in the set. I think that the thing I have to compare this to is Instant Contact, meaning I think this is going to be typically a $5 to $7 card. Instant Contact was a bad pull out of Power of the Elements, but it always had so much potential. It's like an instant fusion that can summon out these really big bodies. It could have seen play in something like Kashtira. It just never really managed to do so. I think that Metamorphosis ends up being the same way. So while it is something that I would consider picking up after the price settles down to around $5, it should be one of the cheaper end cards at Sneak Peek that you look to offload right away. Up next is the card that I'm really excited for. It's a counter trap card called Iron Thunder. Now I think that some people have been saying that this card possibly outclasses cards like Solemn Judgment or Solemn Strike. This card can negate spells, traps, or monster effects, and you pay half your life points to activate it, but you also get to blow up all of the cards in this card's column. I think that the cool thing you could do with this card is summon SP into one extra monster zone, and then line this up with the other extra monster zone. I can see how that would be really annoying to have to play into. Now, while this card is really good in theory, I haven't actually seen anyone choosing to run it over in the OCG. In fact, they're choosing to use Strike and Judgment right now as a way to get rid of Snake Eye Ash. We have seen some column-based cards be effective in the game before. I think Broken Line is one that did see play for a little bit there, but they're really only strong when like no one's expecting it. That said, Iron Thunder is a pretty cheap card right now, kind of the same as Metamorphosis, where it's around that $10 to $20 range for the pre-sales. I think that the perfect card to compare this to is Gravekeeper's Inscription, an OCG import secret rare that we got back in Photon Hypernova. Now, I remember at first players were so hyped to see it, and then it became just another average sort of card in the set and was pretty cheap at like $3 or $4. And then randomly some players saw success with Inscription in the sideboard, so it jumped up to $8 or $10, which I believe is roughly where the card is at now. That said, Iron Thunder should be the same thing. It's just a matter of if and when somebody is actually going to find a way to use the card effectively. It follows a long line of secret rare cards that have had a lot of potential but just never really had the chance to see any use. Think of cards like Get Out and Salesman. It really does just depend on the card getting to be played in the right format. Alright, there's only one other card that I feel like is really worth mentioning from the set, and that is Vydos, the Eruption Dragon of Extinction. This is the boss monster for the Ascend archetype. Even though its name doesn't contain Ascend, they are the brand new TCG exclusive archetype making its debut in Phantom Nightmare. I get that there's some cool combos you can do with the deck, and a lot of the cards themselves do seem like they would be really good, but I don't think that the archetype as a whole is really going to perform. Hopefully they get some new really good cards in Legacy of Destruction, but for now the deck doesn't have too much going on. Now for now the pre-sales of Vydos are in the low teens, I believe around $12 to $14, making them even cheaper than a couple of the other lower end cards we talked about previously. However, I'm expecting this card to be the same as the other secret rares that we've seen for bad TCG exclusive archetypes. There's a lot of options here like Warrock Mountain and Crystal God Tistina. I just chose to show Ghoti of the Deep Beyond because Ghoti is actually possibly going to be meta relevant after the new cards that we have coming in Phantom Nightmare, and I think that the Ascend does have a lot of potential because all of the monsters can special summon themselves out really easily without any sort of restrictions. Stay away from Vydos at your sneak peek because it's definitely going to be too inflated there, but once the set is out officially and the card is only a couple of dollars, I think that that's going to end up being the best time to buy into the archetype. Alright guys, that is all we have for today. Hopefully giving you guys the comparison of existing cards will help you all to make some decisions at your sneak peeks. Remember, early pricing is always really high. A lot of the time, you are better off selling things at sneak peek because their prices can be so inflated. You should always be able to buy the cards back down the road. And I know we didn't cover all of like the secret rares and stuff in this set. It's because the ones that I didn't cover I feel like are really going to be like those bulk secret rares that no one's really going to mind too much. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below and hit that subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.